So the idea is that the conversation is on the stage and we are taking different roles with it. Heck is here with us, or any in a salon, somebody who has some expertise or creators coming in and is sharing a nugget of an idea, usually about 10 or 15 minutes of conversation from that point of view. We are all going to be interacting with it in the chat, add ideas or PDFs or things that you know. So, Farah, if you've come across some really interesting initiatives in Canada, for example, on setting norms and ethics, you might want to throw those in the chat. There is a fake iPad that we're giving away at the end of this for the person who participates the most. Obviously, it's not true, but I want us to all pretend it is. Act as though. So add different things that we might have missed, ask questions, obviously, or offer a different point of view. So different perspective. Here's my experience. Oh, here we don't have that problem. We have this problem. That just, the offer is probably the one where we get into the most interesting conversation. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to build this conversation together. We're going to take the recording and turn it into, with the help of Notebook LM, a really fun video that's kind of going to cover it all over, make it nice and succinct. I'll follow up with also a little bit of an exercise that we could try. And we're going to take all of this into the lab, which starts at 2 o'clock, 2:30, 2 o'clock, 2:30, 2:30. Tim's like, I don't know. 2:30, and it's an AI in practice lab, and we're gonna try some of these ideas. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. How we're gonna get it done. Like I said, I'm gonna stop talking. We're gonna blow up the chat. Heck is gonna talk. Tim's gonna introduce Heck here in just a second. And then we're going to make this a very cool conversation with a very small number of people, but they're designed to be this way because the goal of the makerspace is to leave with something in our hands that we can use like right away. That's the goal. Not, oh, I know something new, which you will get. Not, oh, that's a challenging perspective. Hopefully that'll happen too. But that ultimate kind of, I went to the makerspace and I made the pen I needed, so now I can go write the paper I wanted to write, kind of thing. Okay. Tim, over to you, and then I'll talk, and Tim has his pen too. And then I'll talk about the why in just a second here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. There might be 5 or 6 other people who show up at some point. If not, then this is even better because it's a nice small table. So I just wanted to contextualize. So I'm sorry, Farah, you don't know me. Hi, I'm Tim. I senior advisor at Idealist and Idealist in residence with Chris. I was just at Social Rev Live with the other Chris in Baltimore. And I think he won at least 3 free iPads there. So
yeah, that's right. He did. We had to special ship them.
But I met Heck, like I think it was almost a year ago, right? Heck, was it long? It was about a year ago here in Cleveland. There's an organization here called Business Volunteers Unlimited that sort of sits at the intersection of about 10,000 nonprofits and local businesses in Northeast Ohio. And they held a summit at Case Western Reserve for about 200, 250 nonprofit and social impact professionals on responsible AI and social impact. And it was several gradations of speaker, from the cheerleader at the beginning who is like, we should all be using it for all of the things. Here's all the fancy slides with like zooming cars and bright lights. To some folks who were, here's all of the risks as somebody who works in finance and regulation that you should be aware of. And I was sitting out at a round table with some of the other folks, and they were still a year ago mostly just trying to make sense of all this. And it felt very sort of discordant to have both ends of that spectrum telling you to do kind of different things. But there was one panel that included Heck, that even on the panel, it was very different. But Heck was the one person out of probably 12 presenters who I felt was telling the group of 250 people the right questions to ask themselves about how and when and whether and in what way to engage with AI. So it was actually providing them with thoughtful exploration of the question rather than here, you should do this, this, or this, and like good luck out there in the world. So, like Kiki. And ever since then, and I actually spoke up from the floor and asked a question, and then at a break, Heck actually did me the great honor of coming out on the floor to say we should talk more. And we've been talking about AI and many other things ever since. And I've been looking for lots of fun and interesting ways to sort of help more people interact with Heck's very specific expertise related to this. And again, in helping us ask our own good questions related to AI. And trying to sort of bring that into spaces, and what better space than here in the Makerspace Salon. So Heck, I would love for you to do all of the formal introductions of yourself, and then we'll do a little bit of introductions.
Well, let's, before we get to Heck, I did want to just say, because I don't want to break his flow. Once you start talking Heck, you're going to go right from the intro in. Let's, the why of this session, like why are we doing this salon? It's because I mean, I've not had anyone else tell me this isn't true yet, but most people at their companies are being told not to use the public versions or the private versions that they may be paying for because there are all these risks of data loss and that kind of thing. And while there are ways of working around that, and these platforms have certainly put that in place, legal HR is still like, don't look at it, don't touch it, don't worry about it. We built our own, and they're usually awful. Or we use Copilot, which is basically just an interface with a bunch of tools on the back end. That's still, if you talk to Microsoft employees, they'll also tell you it's not that good or reliable. So how can we use the good stuff and stay competent and still follow the rules of our employer? Because this one AI guru that I do follow online was saying, in 3 years, the employee base that was denied access to AI to learn it as it really is, not the fake version the company built, will be replaced because companies can teach other people how to do the job, but they're going to want you to know AI day one because your workload is going to be significantly higher and more complex. The demands are complex. And so there are these two groups. There's people looking for jobs and not quite in. When they get in, they will be AI competent and ready to go. And there's us who we know a lot about what we do. We just don't know how to bring it to the workplace anymore because workplaces are switching from a questioning culture or an asking culture to one of documentation. If you have a conversation, where is it? How can I access it? I need to get something out of it. I want to look at 20 conversations on this topic by our team over the past 6 months and get the sentiment. And that kind of thing. If we're not using AI, keeping our knowledge, organizing the knowledge, we might become extinct. So it's incredibly good to have somebody like Heck to kick us off on this conversation. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce myself. We'll go around and we'll end at you, Heck, okay? All right. My name is Chris Jarvis. I'm Canadian. I live in Baltimore. I've lived here since 2018. And I do this kind of work because for me, and I'm interested in this topic because for me, it's important to make sure that our space, our sector, is highly competent and is bringing the best of what we have to offer, especially in this fascism era. So that's me. Over to Chris Mann.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone. I'm Chris Mann, Head of Community Affairs for Bain Capital. We're an alternative investment firm. I'm based out of our headquarters here in Boston. Joined the firm about 3 years ago from the nonprofit side, actually, at City Year, where I was doing a lot of their fundraising. And I love the opportunity to take a lot of the amazing, talented, well-resourced people that we have in the firm and connect them to amazing nonprofit organizations that are doing great work about things they care about. So that's why I'm here, is to figure out how to do that better and at greater scale.
Oh, sorry, Chris. You just
Should I pass to Chris? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just pass it to anybody I want.
Any name. Yeah.
Great. I'll pass it to Farah.
Hi, everyone, and I apologize. I feel like I'm a hot mess right now. So I'm Farah Rooney, Canadian. I live in Toronto. I'm really excited to be here. I help lead corporate citizenship here for Volunteer Canada. So my role specifically is working with corporate Canada on knowledge mobilization, on I run a lot of our consulting business and supporting corporate Canada around employer-led volunteering excellence and all of the things that that means. That's part of it. So the other piece is I have worked in both the nonprofit world and the corporate world, and in corporate I've always sort of worked in tech. I started out in 2007, 2008 working for Electronic Arts. And then I since sort of kind of going back and forth doing consulting for nonprofits. And then I also started I was COO of a tech company, a tech startup. We were working on on developing a CRM, as well as I sort of launched this really kind of interesting product I still think is really exciting, but like, most startups didn't really go anywhere around a lightweight data solution tool. But now with AI, I don't even think any of that matters anymore. So I'm really curious beyond my role, and I can tell you that Kona Silent, well, not really Kona Silence or whatever. Volunteer Canada is not really adapting to AI quickly, but I'm very, very interested in this work. So I'm sort of sitting here as Farah Rooney versus Farah Rooney in the work that I do versus sort of Farah Rooney Volunteer Canada. And in fact, I just sort of jumped in. So Chris was fantastic, reached out to me and said, hey, let's talk. We've been talking for a couple of months, just having, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but having really interesting conversations around things that we're curious about in the tech space. I'm very concerned with the social sector falling behind. I'm very concerned, and I have been for a long time, just with technology uptake in practice. Again, just to kind of, let you know, we're working on really interesting data-driven products or data-driven projects, particularly in partnership with the Canadian government. And, we're looking at rolling these things out in 2026, 2027. And I'm like, you guys, it's going to be a different world. And we, are having these conversations that it's not like 6 or 7 years ago, right? Where, we can pretty much see, how much Excel is going to get better or whatever in a year. Now it's like a completely different world. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm very curious about that. Chris just threw this out there and I just jumped in. So I look like a mess. I managed to move my afternoon around, but I'm really excited to be here and I'm just sort of along for the ride. Fantastic to meet everybody. And thank you again, Chris. It's fun to be here. And I love these pockets. I love talking and moving forward. Over to you, Kiki.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was having audio issues. So I was trying to figure them out. Can you hear me okay? All right, perfect. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Kiki Huckabee. I'm a corporate social responsibility manager with IBM. One of my key focuses is supporting our commitment of upskilling 30 million people globally by 2030. And the primary way we do that is through a platform we call IBM Skills Build, which is free for anyone. They can join, start taking courses around AI, cybersecurity, IT support, data analytics, professional skills. So that is a free platform that anyone can use. My focus is on adult learners in the US. And so my portfolio is primarily made up of nonprofit organizations that are implementing skills built strategically to support some of the gaps that they have in their programming. So excited for today's discussion and to learn a little bit more. I may have to hop off just a little early, so I apologize for that, but lovely to meet you all.
Awesome. Should I go next? Is that pick up
I
from there?
apologize. I can pass it.
Yeah, no,
to Tim or
that's
Heck,
good.
but I
That's
think
good.
you both
It's a
already
learning.
introduced
Yeah. I think that
yourself.
I was mostly asking Chris anything else. No, but I think that that's me. Correct. And then I'll screen share from there. Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Good to see some faces, familiar faces, and good to meet you all. I already sent you LinkedIn invites if you posted it, so hopefully we can connect. But nice to meet you all, and you'll see me kind of like move up and down my day. But I'm excited to share a little bit about our conversation today. Um, a little bit of what I call subject positioning so that you understand my perspective as how we're coming through this. I am a scholar practitioner, so I'm both an academic and in practice. So the world of implementation science and translation is where I thrive and spend a lot of my time. I consider myself a systems engineer, and so really thinking about collaboration and collective knowledge as an important space. So as you can imagine, I really care about AI because it's the center of collective knowledge. My training, I'm an engineer, but my majority of my training is in public health, and so a lot of my conversation that I bring to you is from a regulatory perspective, but not clinical necessarily. It's more so how do we deal with people? And because I do work in the nonprofit sector as my day job, I also bring that social welfare perspective. So hopefully, what we talk about today, we can kind of think about this triangle of technology, but also, regulatory perspectives, but then also implications and how we can kind of navigate that. So that's who I am. I am Puerto Rican, born and raised, and so I speak very quickly. So if you need me to slow down, feel free to flag me. But otherwise, I'll do my best to make sure to give you time. I'm happy to take questions along the way. Feel free to unmute yourself, very informal. And if not, we can take questions towards the end. My intent is to cover some slides. There's a few of them, and there's information, but feel free to read. But I'm just going to highlight the important concepts until we get towards the end where we can do a little bit more explaining. Sounds good for everyone? Excellent. I hope that I made that work. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Um, Alrighty. Excellent. So I think that the first caveat to start is that the important point of this conversation is that many organizations have put some sort of halt into how different individuals or what type of data or what type of tools individuals might use towards this effort. And so I think it's really important to just kind of honor that whatever guidance you're receiving from your institution from a more like ability standpoint and what you can do, you should really follow that. However, the intent of today's conversation is how can you get into the world of generative AI and really advance it without having the need to run through all the process and policies and regulations in place. Before getting started, I think it's really important that I always start with a little bit of ground setting. And the important part is that I want to almost uplift the definition, not because Kiki's here also. Kiki, I didn't mean to like talk about IBM, but there's a definition that IBM has put out of what is AI, right? And in short, it's technology that enables computers and machines to stimulate human learning, comprehension, problem solving, decision making, creativity, and autonomy. Whenever I think about this definition or just AI in general, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, if you're not, I'm sorry, I always tell people we're moving towards the blue light head floating above us and trying to communicate and engage with it in some sort of like really easy way. I put this as a definition because when we think about AI, there is almost no value without learning and decision making. We leverage AI to learn, right? We're asking questions, we're trying to go deeper, broader, but it's almost to an extent of trying to do something with that learning. And so, really important to have that kind of context in place. And so, that's why we start with that definition. It's a technology, right? Now, why is it important? Well, it's a technology, it's a tool, but it also represents a social transformation. And what I mean by that is that 2 years ago, we still had most of the workforce not able to use Excel, right? And I think all of us could remember the introduction of Excel into the workplace and when everybody thought we were going to change the world with analytics and being very data-driven in decision making, and we just didn't do that. It simply didn't happen. And so a lot of that had to do with upskilling, right? Workers were not necessarily skilled. And a lot of that knowledge fell in the universities to teach students, but then assume the workers would come only through an institutionalized education pathway. So just throwing that out there that it's a societal transformation, but remember Excel. So some of the similar hurdles that we've gone through with Excel are almost similar in the design that we're going through now. And AI's value proposition is it can improve with efficiency, holistic decision making, scalability of solutions. You've all heard this, right? But I think that at the end of the day, another piece that is not obvious of the value proposition of AI, that it's almost very important to this conversation, is that AI is the foundation for what's to come in the future, right? When we're thinking about maybe robots treating us for patient care or something of the nature, all of the underlying under the hood is artificial intelligence, right? And so it's intelligence that is artificial. And so if we're imagining a world of flying cars, and none of this is like too far off, right? We can all figure out like solutions that are really micro. But that's where this is really important, that understanding the foundations of what is generative AI will also have implications to the things that we build on top of it that we hope to engage in a more bionic way, let's say, to some degree. So I think important though, a little bit of timeline, because the next slides will talk very briefly about what we consider AI and then jump into this. But a really brief timeline, because I wanted to kind of go here and say that AI has been around since before 1950s, right? Prior to 1950s, the introduction of neural networks all the way in 1943 by some researchers is really what led Alan Turing to publish Computer Machinery and Intelligence. In that place, the Turing test was essentially trying to test whether a machine or a computer were better at recall in simplicity. And the idea here was to show that computers could recall and computers could engage with humans in a way that felt and created some sort of relationship. Later on, there was some conferences that happened at Dartmouth, all the way in New Hampshire. That's where the term AI was coined for the first time. So as you can see, really early 50s, way before the introduction of the interwebs. Later on, Eliza, which is a chatbot, was the first introduction to this idea of what we're all maybe familiar with chatbots, right? Eliza was an idea of a psychotherapist, and the question was, can a robot replace a human in a human-human interaction? And so it was a proof of concept that psychotherapy was its own nuance, right? Like psychotherapy was being defined, but it was almost this place on how social sectors were being defined and solidified with technology in the back end without our knowledge. Later, the 80s saw the AI winter. It's really when, all the promises that we said that AI was going to bring by 1970 did not happen. And so we saw a winter of like 10-ish years that funding was redirected. And so a lot of what started happening in this space was, what is the technology that we're going to move forward, right? As you can imagine, tensions with the World Wide Web, all that stuff. 1997, right? Enter ends a little bit. Deep Blue defeats a chess champion. That's the first time where the first moment, Eliza, was about helping a human, whereas in 1997, now we have AI surpassing a human. And so it's almost these two dynamics that in a 30-year span, we went from having AI be a friend to AI be a competitor. And so it's this dynamic of how we interact with humans. And then the 2000s to 2010s, this timeline is the introduction of the World Wide Web, the emergence of cell phones, the emergence of all the platform solutions, technology costs went down, cloud-based solutions, all of that. So I almost wanted to give you this perspective of timeline for two reasons briefly. We've all been around AI for way before the Gen Is, generative AIs of the world. And the other part is that we've already tried addressing like the relationship of human and AIs at different contexts for sure, right? But we've always tried to be there. So what I'm trying to say is that the closeness of AI shouldn't be a spook to us, because it is actually closer to us and around more to us. If you've used Grammarly to correct your sentences, how do you think it knows your word is wrong? Because AI is in the back end scanning your text. And so that's where really there's some closeness and proximity with AI that I wanted to highlight. But high level, when I'm talking about AI or artificial intelligence, this isn't an exhaustive list, and it's not like it's a sector level categorization that you can find everywhere. But these are the 5 buckets that I would almost introduce you and implore you to think about when you're thinking about options on how to leverage AI in the workplace. So number 1 is, and they're almost progressive, so you can read the first row left to right, and then the second row and the level of complexity and technicality. So number 1 is machine learning. Everybody has probably heard of machine learning or ML. That's really a section of AI, imagine like a domain of AI that really focuses on emerging patterns from data and then learning to assist in decision making. Next to it is predictive analytics. Predictive analytics, it builds upon machine learning and really then incorporates statistics. And the whole point is to try and predict the future. So learning is about current and past, predicting is about the future. And so those two scenarios of, are you going historical to understand something, or are you going to the future to try and make a guess about something? Those are both aspects of AI that are very different. The next one's deep learning. It's the one that we'll talk the least about, but you all have phones that take FaceTime. That is what deep learning is, essentially. The ability of you to move your face around and have something not just take 2D. It understands different dimensions. Those are different data points, different time. And so deep learning also considers time, not that others don't, but that's where you can start thinking about the complexity. And when we're talking about deep learning, none of us ever see that in the front end of what we're touching. So it's just happening in the back end, and it's a lot of knowledge and very complex. Now, on the bottom is generative AI, which is where we're focused the majority of our conversation today in the next slides, and then open it up to questions. But generative AI, the important part is that it is a section of artificial intelligence that is meant to develop new content that leverages variables and sources from all across the world, right? All across context. So what I mean by that is that generative AI allows you to integrate video data, quantitative data, qualitative data, all sorts of data, counts, not counts, all in one place and make sense of it, right? The idea is generation. In order to generate, it needs to have data. So all the conversations that you've been hearing about, like, there's no more data to feed models, or where are we going to get new information? We need humans to feed. It's really because you can't really make more out of everything, right? If you've already exhausted all of the data endpoints. So that's why generative AI is really dependent on new information, and it's almost dependent on us as humans, because every time we ask it something different or produce something different, we're also contributing to that generation of of collective intelligence, if we can use that way. And then the last one is agentic AI, and this is a little bit more, I don't even want to say modern, because everything's changing so often, but this is like the new of AI. Agentic AI, you'll see later, I call them guardians. But an agentic AI, it's essentially, you can imagine that it's like a protector for either your system or your tool. They're AI solutions that are meant to reason and strategize and react and involve themselves with you. So you can think about it like a chatbot, but not in the same way, because a chatbot is only responding from the information that it has in the back end with you. An AI agent actually is there with you. Imagine another human trying to make questions, ask questions, clarify, warn you about things. And so that's why I call them guardians, because they are like the superhuman protector of, like, hey, you're doing something that might be at risk, and we'll touch about it later there. But always think about these phases, because all of this is all artificial intelligence. Majority of the time these days when we're talking, we're really referring to generative AI all the way on the bottom. So how can you use generative AI now? There's 3 areas that we'll talk briefly: automation, ideation and iteration, and content creation. I have a bunch of examples, but obviously that would make these slides too large. So if there's anything specific that you'd like to learn more or talk more about, feel free to ping those and note those, and we can go in depth on those. But as we're going through automation, these are the 6 ways that I feel everybody should bare minimum. I was trying to think about this conversation and think about, how do you introduce this to folk of, like, you should be doing some of this, or, and every time I talk to different individuals, depending on their level of need or involvement in their organization, you'll see that people are mature. But let's assume outside of your organization, you're trying to understand AI through automation, right? Here's the 6 ways that you can focus. One is scheduling. I understand that that sounds straightforward, and that's what everybody wanted to use AI for in the beginning. But at the same time, in a resource-constrained environment for organizations, sometimes overhead and administration takes so much percentage of the time to book, schedule, and orchestrate, whether that's like to build a when to meet or whatever you want to call it. So when you're really thinking about efficiencies, I understand it sounds straightforward, but scheduling, number 1 priority. 2, managing files. This is a little bit less obvious, but if, let's say, a lot of organizations sometimes have data that they're sharing. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do, but a lot of organizations share data via email, programmatic data, funder data, reports that are sent over, right? There is such a world where generative AI can be leveraged to file manage, meaning that a human would never have to be the person picking that file up from the email, waiting for that email to arrive, and then when that moment happens, storing it in a specific folder. That all can be process automated. That helps with timelines, remembering tasks, but it also helps with streamlining. Remember I said about the future? That automation pipeline gives you almost like a one-up to be able to explore other opportunities with AI. And that's also related to standardizing processes, managing files and standardizing processes. I'll talk less about standardizing processes because different organizations have different processes, and that's itself its own variability. But you can imagine that when you're thinking about one platform to a second platform, is AI integrated there? Can it? That's where it comes into play. On the other side, this is more like human, like task-related thinking, like ideas of like note-taking. And when I say note-taking, I think it's really important that different transcripts, including like the Zoom transcript, produce different outputs. But one of the areas where people are most exploratory is how can you use note-taking in field work? So if you're a consultant or you're an organization that engages with communities, we don't have like we can't put a phone and start recording people, but what are the systems in play or the rooms that need to be fit to be able to make note-taking through generative AI efficient for community reasons, for programming reasons, for sentiment analysis. Chatbots, I think everybody's here familiar with chatbots. That's its own thing. And then writing assistants. And when I say writing assistants, the automation here is that you could have 3 audiences, right? It could be the board, your associates, and then your program participants that you want to communicate the same piece of information to. Either somebody can sit down and write those 3 drafts in the marketing team, or you can produce 9 iterations of it, reduce it to 6, and then have people react to all 6 and choose the one that's better. So I'm providing an example here on how writing assistance isn't just like, help me write this. It's also about, hey, maybe I can approach this through an engaged participatory perspective where before I put out all this information, I'm going to produce different iterations of it and have folk that are my stakeholders tell me how well this aligns with what we're trying to communicate. So it's this different framing on how we use information that because I'm not spending the time writing 3 different drafts of 3 different stakeholders, I can then iterate on it and automate some opportunity of decision making for the publication. So that's AI and automation overall. This is a table, but again, this is similar, but this is ideation and iteration. And I'm going to walk more briefly through this because I think we all do this more naturally, and that's how we learn with new systems that we're, especially around generative AI. But number one is simulation. So simulations are really great, especially in disaster recovery. So when I say disaster, I'm not only talking about natural disasters, I'm also talking about like cyber disasters or when an organization leads into like a cybersecurity breach. What do you do in that moment? How do you do a mass communication around what happened to all of your stakeholders? Oftentimes, if you're dealing with a cyber breach, you're not going to sit down and try and, if you don't have the staff to write what's the best communication to all these different channels, right? But at the same time, simulation writing is part of the practice that you can build on in ideation and iteration. Second is overlapping market and product research. I think that's really important, right? A lot of research happens academically, and then the market research happens in the market, and everybody's trying to almost like say like, oh, we should be building these ideas into the market or vice versa. And generative AI serves in the middle because it has access to both. It has access to the papers, the literature, the websites, but then it also has access to the benchmarkings, the qualitations, the thresholds, the numbers, the data, and all so forth. Reconstructing narratives is really important. I just mentioned that one specifically if you're working with language variable populations, right? So if you're really trying to target populations that might speak in Spanish and English or Haitian Creole, this is an opportunity to almost try restructuring narratives to also meet those communications and increase engagement. Then elucidating missed opportunities. This is probably my favorite thing to do that I always tell people when people don't do it, which please do it. And I don't need credit or anything like that. It's not that I created it, but whenever you have a transcript, rather than asking it to summarize, ask it to tell you what was missed. And that's almost like a different side of the conversation. Oftentimes you'll find that it'll tell you, hey, y'all started talking about this, but you never finished or made any decisions. And actually, this person didn't tell you what the action item was. So rather than asking AI, hey, be smart and tell me what the summaries are, it's actually like, what were the gaps in this conversation? And I think that's even that level of introductory doesn't require you to go beyond the needs, but it actually brings a lot of value. And then lastly, it's version comparisons, which we'll talk high level in a couple slides. And this is just comparing across versions. So this is super high level content creation. All of you probably have some experience with content creation because somebody has made an image at this point by writing into some sort of generative AI and it generated visuals from text data. That's the whole connection up there, right? And so content creation, so developing visual content, important part that I always tell people, accessibility checks. Generative AI can actually perform that, right? Is this particular aspect accessibility friendly? And that's not just languages, color palettes. It's all these types of things that we might have to hire somebody or pass somebody through, but we can integrate into our mechanisms. Transcripts into potential thought leadership. I think going back to that point of we need new information for a generative AI to be relevant, right? We need to be putting out our thoughts around generative AI. And so maybe it's relating ourselves with generative AI and how we're using it to produce and put ideas out there for it to learn. And then the last two are, I almost mentioned them, but I'll say that content creation is very different in the world of social media. And so when we're thinking about content creation, right, we also have to think about social media and non-social media. And so in those two specific areas, it's both the analytics and like the click and the rates and the pursuits of views, but it's also what are people talking about, the qualitative data, what are they saying, what are their feelings around this? So it's both quantitative and the whole typical like how fast, how good, how bad kind of questions, but also of what and for what are people engaging with social media. And then language accommodations I mentioned. Now, the last two slides are 4 scenarios that I created of like if I were to want to use AI and I really wanted to, these are the 4 areas that regardless of what the data type is and what we're doing, you can start building. And some of it are pictures, so I'll explain really briefly. But at the end of the day, on the left side, I'm gonna just highlight it because if I don't mention prompt engineering, I feel like I would do a disservice to the simplicity of this conversation, which is, you know, the idea of garbage in, garbage out. that has elevated to garbage in. Now you have to think about the in out and the model that's around it. So if the model, right, because there's so many different AI models that are used, and those are the models that are like underlying, and there's different foundational models and all that. So now we have to think about that. And for that reason, our prompting ability and how we structure that is really important. I have this here. People will come up with different versions. I like saying role setting, goal definition, instruction, and constraint development, and output specification. You'll find a lot of resources on what's the best prompting structure. I'm only providing this here so that you can think about the four main steps that really help to some degree around thinking on how to bucket issues or in engagements with AI. So just putting that out there, happy to talk more about what each means, examples and stuff like that of the nature. But I think really important, that's why some tools are more helpful towards research if you're thinking in this framing, because it's almost like I want to research in a systematic way. On the other side is multimodal approaches, and this is where you start seeing a lot more work of what is multimodal AI. So essentially, it's across platforms and across solutions. So you saw how I gave you like 5 flavors of artificial intelligence earlier. Multimodal is essentially connecting all of those different 5 flavors or combinations of them to do something. So think about input, right? In this case, the input could be something that I write on some sort of prompt. It goes through 2 models. It has 2 different outputs, but then it makes one singular outcome at the end, right? And so what that means is that I ran it through ChatGPT, the same prompt, and then I ran it through Gemini. And at the end, I actually used maybe a third tool or myself to overlap and integrate and resolve those 2 particular things. That does 2 things for us. This is the naturality of a quality check, quality assurance that we start creating, but it also requires what I call a human in the loop. Right? Like, it's this idea of right now for organizations to feel comfortable with policies, regulations, or where they're at, you can't really count on something going in and out without there being a human in the loop. So this step of integration is where we have the opportunity to bring back a human and not have to be involved in the entirety of the process, but come back here. So if you're producing a report with the same level of data, or you're asking something to provide you a market research, you can do market research in 2 different Gen AI tools and then consolidate that research. Either you keep what's similar or you keep what's not similar between the 2. That's your decision as a user, but that's where we can learn some of this space. Now, on the other last 2 pieces, and I promise this is my last slide, is ingest, don't export. Most of the issues that employers have with data is with generative AI is around the data. It has nothing to do with the tools. It has to do with the data, right? And it has to do with who has permission and to what degree. This is not a simple win-win for always, but I know that I just need to say this, which is most issues with generative AI, most apply to data leaving your organization. It's not about data entering your organization. Sure, there's cybersecurity issues and all that with data coming into your organization. But what this really plays is that we almost have to like restructure the question of, do I always have to export my findings that I'm using Gen AI in my organization? Or can I keep that in my organization safe and bring the outside world in? It's almost easier to engineer processes to bring outside data from your organizational environment in than to do the opposite, because to do the opposite, you have to notify all of your program participants. You have to get consent, stuff of that nature. And so that's why that type of approach works. And you'll see the flow here suggested to internal rather than external. And now on the last side is this idea that I mentioned earlier, which is agentic surveillance, which is related to this point on the left. Agentic surveillance or guardians is this idea of, let's say I'm in a database in my work environment and I copy paste or I download data in a CSV, right? We've all done that. The agent would pop up on my screen and say, hey, just so you know, this is identifiable information without me prompting it, right? That's what an agent is. It's that's why keep saying the word of guardian, which is like this background surveillance that knows that certain triggers need to trigger you to remember something. Now, this isn't a foolproof solution, but it starts going towards the direction of, can agents help employers or just data be more protected by adding one prior process of quality assurance of notification, acknowledgement, hey, you need to do this, you're not able to export this data, and so forth. So I think that I'll leave it at that with agentic surveillance, but just know that this is where a lot of the world, agentic surveillance is almost like we took everything we know about the generative AIs of the world and like covered it into one, but it's also it's decision making, it's reaction, it's protection, it's enhancement of human behavior, and so forth. So with all that being said, these 4 scenarios are places where we can start, but not the foolproof solution. but I'm happy to take any questions, and there's my contact information as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Héc. Really appreciate that. All right. Want to say hi to Mariana. We said hello in the chat, but I just want to add her to the very good. Glad to have you here. I wasn't going to make you put on your video because I had no idea what was possible, but thank you for joining us there. Yeah.
You're good. I'm happy to show my face now that we're in conversation.
Cool, cool. All right, awesome. Let's go to before we go on, Mariana, what kind of work does JustWorks do?
We're an HR tech company, so we have a tech solution for small businesses to help them and support them as they manage their workforce, managing their payroll, taxes, compliance. So it was actually really great to hear Héc talk about a lot of sort of like even the accessibility pieces. I know I've talked to our engineering team about how they're thinking about some of this work. So I think I have like two hats on right now, kind of the curious hat of what question is going to go back to our tech teams and be like, hey, are you thinking about this? And are you thinking about that? And are you thinking about that? And then also through my lens as a social impact program manager, we do grants, and I'm always thinking about how we can engage with nonprofits. And in the nature of being in a tech company, I always think about, well, how is tech also like involved in that? So it's more like a curiosity on how things are, like feeling like and thinking, folks are thinking about this. And again, if there's anything that JustWorks can do, I'm always kind of like, should we do it? We should do it if it's going to sort of create a more equitable way. I mean, leaning into leveraging these tools.
That's great. Thank you. Great to have you here. Okay, questions, quandaries, queries, contributions. What are we thinking? Chris, you've got a build-in. What's your scenario for using AI?
Sure. So right now we have an internally approved vetted version of ChatGPT. Right now we've got access to, I think, five Thinking and 5 Pro.
Good. That's
And all the
excellent.
legacy.
Better
Yeah,
than money.
which is
Yeah.
great.
And how does it work then? So 5 Pro and 5 Thinking, you can, cover this most of what these tools can do and the capabilities. Do you find hung up, or do you use AI out of work and have a comparison?
I haven't been doing a ton out of work for that same issue that I think Héc acknowledged and Tim reinforced, right? It's the using our stuff externally.
Yeah.
Is tricky. So if anything, it's been more personal, but my use cases are less there just in general. I think our gaps are a little bit on the absolutely like sensitivity around some of the data we have available, less so on the social impact side than on our normal investors side, clearly. More so probably of saying, what's the internal support for training, and then thinking about advanced uses. So like the majority of what I'm doing is more, help me write this more effectively, efficiently, help me summarize this, help me kind of streamline some basic things, less on how are we thinking about generating insights,
Okay.
driving things forward. So it's more in that automation bucket that Héc was talking about, than I would say in anything that's helping us advance the work.
Okay.
I
Anybody
can jump
can
in.
come
Oh,
up.
sorry.
Perfect.
Yeah,
You did it.
I
You did it. Perfect.
yeah, I could jump in a little bit. I mean, what I'm really hearing and seeing that I'm really curious about is I think that we are hitting this tension between the speed and capability. I was gonna say culpability as well. Capability of these digital tools, the tension that these digital tools are being developed and their potential against the tension of human beings. So I'm really, it's the same issues that haven't really been resolved, but things around fear of technology, fear of breaking things, fear of not being seen as smart enough, so they don't know how to use them, they look stupid, right? We're seeing, I mean, there's some really interesting research I'm seeing around stigma for employees using AI, particularly amongst stigma coming against women and BIPOC folks using these tools. That, you know, women who use these tools for, you know, their engineering work are seen as lesser than, and then, you know, a white dude using it. So there's all of these human problems that are getting in the way of really embracing this technology. And the technology is moving so fast. Like, I'm particularly concerned about the nonprofit space, where you know, I was saying this to Chris earlier, that like, yeah, maybe like 10 years ago, it wasn't such a big deal if, you know, somebody wasn't like a Power Excel user, or somebody, you know, broke their website for a couple of hours, you know, like it's not a huge, you know, that technology, but it's just moving so quickly now that if we don't address some of these core issues, I'm very concerned that the social sector, I mean, all of it, and I can speak about Canada too, like Canada, we have a productivity problem, right? In Canada, like systematically. So, you know, nationally, you know, in Canada, but as well in the nonprofit space, like how can we get over this stuff? And how can we tackle the messiness of human beings to ensure that everyone is skilled up? And I mean, and just like finally, like I could just like, AI has such unbelievable potential to revolutionize the social sector space and revolutionize like a space where, you know, charities are stretched. We are doing too much for too, like, you know, there's not enough money. And you could think about, which, you know, again, in a perfect world, we just want us to all be funded. But, you know, things and things are going to get really rough in Canada, right? And where we're already seeing our Prime Minister Mark Carney doing some early signaling that we're moving into an austerity budget. We're having a budget coming out November 4th. I think we're going to see, I think it's going to be rough up here for all the reasons we know. So yeah, so like that's, I'm just throwing that out. Like, that's what I'm really interested in, like how we can move the needle around some of this stuff.
And I think that's a really great and valid point. And I think that just to add to that, that from a, I don't want to come off as a, what's the word, cynical, but if we situate ourselves from a dynamic of a nonprofit, and let's use a foundation, right? Not that they're the only philanthropist, but a nonprofit and a philanthropist, right? The nonprofit sector suffers from competing for funds and clients. At the end of the day, if we were to simplify it, that's the issue, right? So if all of a sudden, quote unquote, not that nonprofits are competing, but you can consider it. If all of a sudden my competitor is evaluating my social impact for me with generative AI by using my website and just running and using generative AI to be like, what is this organization's impact, right? Like, who's vetting that if I don't know what's being applied to me from the external world? So what I'm trying to say with that is that yes, there is that tension, but there's almost like a business like underlying, like, hello, we kind of have to kind of think about this, because from a competitive advantage, anybody can go and scan me now and rank me and put me in some sort of order. And if I don't know how I fit there, I could struggle. So I really appreciate that and how that can fit there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I haven't even, yeah.
One of the things that I feel a lot when we talk about like I wish we were allowed to do more of this, is this can sometimes feel both sort of squishy and sort of like there's just so much available right? Like I feel like there's some urgency, right? Like we should be letting people learn what to do so that they're prepared for the future. But we all keep saying that the future is changing so fast. How do we know what people should be learning to do? And then that makes it hard, I think, also from if you're looking from a bottom up, it's like, what should I be learning? And there's not actually a whole lot of direction from the top down yet of like, we know how we're going to be applying this so that the two things can sort of, we're going to be using it this way in 3 years. These are the things you should be learning. It's like, you should be learning all the things, but don't do it on our platform. How do we sort of connect the simple, how do we tell people like the foundational things? Like I think kind of what you were doing, Héc, here's what's going to be universally applicable. Don't worry about trying to learn 1,000 things. Start here. and learn these things as sort of like your grounding feels like maybe it'll reduce some of the urgency and give me back some of my agency.
I'd say that right now, a great point, and I say that right now, a lot of that, every time we talk about Gen AI, even though we don't do it, there should be a on par conversation about data, right, and governance. And I bring that up to say that when we're thinking about where do we start, maybe, right? Because you're talking about how do we close the faucet so that people start picking up the water, essentially. Like, well, how do we do that? And I think that partially the challenge is that we have really bad data quality, but then we're trying to apply generative AI solutions to different data quality issues. So maybe it's about piloting, right? It's about what data it's not about sensitivity. It's like what data are more routinely and consistently collected in this nature. Could that be reporting? Could it not? So just kind of bringing that up, that it's not a full true answer, but where we can pause is that space. And also from a less data perspective is integration. That task of integration for an organization, right? It's like oftentimes you'll find that an organization has their payroll over there and then some other information about something over there, and nobody ever can know what is the overlap. And so from an institutional perspective, even within that protection of inside the organization, is that idea of integration. How can I integrate two things?
Farah, to your question, just acknowledging, thank you, Heck, that was a good response. And I'd be curious to see what you're getting in your conversations. I do hear people, these are the top lines for the media to carry because they don't know what else to talk about. So we're going to talk about the amount of energy that's being sucked up. So Meta made a deal with the corrupt politicians in the United States that they could get energy at a low price, and then the citizens would all make up the difference. So my energy bill is paying for Meta to become even more billionary than it is now. So somehow they've sucked me into this process of funding that company's growth. So I hate living in communist countries. So that's a joke because lately it seemed weird to see some of these things happen. But typically it's like, well, I don't want to use how can you use AI? You're going to feel so guilty. And someone had told me, Nick, I don't know if you know anything about this, and obviously I can use the AI to figure it out too, but using the AI for one session, which the back and forth is, it could take me 10 seconds, it would take Tim 2 minutes, or vice versa. It's not the length of time, it's the back and forth. But typically one session with AI is equal to about 1 second of running your microwave. And so even an entire day of the typical person interacting with AI, again, it's not 8 hours, it's like how much interaction did you do in that 8 hours, is about the same as heating up your lunch at work. But the problem is being pushed down to citizens, even though we're funding Meta, and the blame is being pushed down to us, much like recycling. Well, the world's going to hell because we aren't recycling. But that's the externalizing of the problem by the fossil fuels to find a group to blame for the problem, but it's actually the fossil fuels who came up with the recycling program in the first place. So it feels a bit like that for me right now, Farah.
Yeah, and I feel like, so agreed, and I think I did some back of the napkin math using AI that said like one flight from Toronto to Montreal is equal to 33 million prompts, AI prompts, right? But we don't question traveling, right? But like on it, like this comes up almost every time. And it's important, and I want to honor where that's coming from. But at the same time, it's like, well, are we an environmental chair? Like, should we not be lobbying for then, better, safer energy across the board, right? Like, then should we be going into like, well, let's lean into nuclear, let's lean into this, rather than like what, buying up. Anyway, I just wondered if folks had any like savvy, caring responses to that. So we're not, we're continuing and honoring what these folks are saying, because it, like, obviously, it's important.
I just tagged the link. It's not a paper is a solution, but I just tagged the link because the circumstance around this issue at Google was particularly against this. So Dr. Gebru was asked to retract this paper that they published on the climate implications of firing up the Google models every morning. And so there is a lot of just like resourcing around like the implications, but decision making and how people handled it. Not that, again, it's not a high level solution, but it's getting to the point of this idea of what are the climatic implications of generative AI, not just using it, but also all the data farms that are behind it and so of the nature as well.
I'm trying to type this out, but I'm just going to say it. Rare earth, you've heard about rare earth. I thought it was something you dug up in China. It's not. It's a byproduct of making aluminum. Aluminum is very energy expensive to make. There's two places that make a lot of it, Australia and China. China makes a ton of rare earth because they have 15%, almost 30% now of the grid is renewable. So it doesn't cost them anything to make it. So they generate a ton of rare earth. The United States makes hardly any of it because our grid down here is about 75 years behind China. It cannot possibly, to create rare earth in this country would require a massive upgrade equal to say the investment in ice. So I guess we could do it if we wanted to, but nobody wants to. And so now we have to buy it from Australia because they make aluminum and they have this rare earth. But it's all about energy. It has nothing to do with the dirt itself, which I think is interesting. But yeah, our whole problem, even with energy for AI, is this really bad. That's why they're doing it with diesel engines now. That's like even how we're creating energy for AI is not efficient. It's awful.
But even more reason to have employers have people jump on, because the sooner all of us are contributing to the models, the sooner they will be less environmentally stressing, right? That's like part of it. It's like collective science. That's the whole point of it being open source, that we should all be throwing at it so that it gets more refined and it's less toxic. So there's almost like this balance of like, how do we actually use collaborative approaches to make sure that the climate implications of Gen AI or AI in general are also remediated. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's what I sort of love, Heck. And I mean, I wasn't at N10 this year, but my colleague was, and he shared with me that almost every single AI session, because AI is the big, clearly the big thing right now, like it started with something about this, and it's like, okay, well, how do we just say, okay, let's move on, like with again, so I think that's a really great solution, to be like, okay, well then let's talk about like how we can actually solution this, or let's talk about like maybe us who care about AI, we need to start lobbying the energy more. Maybe we need to, you know what I mean, like rather than just say, oh, this, and then we don't move, and then that stops us. Because I feel like especially in progressive spaces, we can sometimes get immobilized. I'm being really honest. We can sometimes get immobilized by what's right, and that sort of stops us, and we don't want to, we don't want that to happen. We want to be directing forward, right?
No, right.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody, today. It's 2:00. We're going to end. Before you jump off, could we take 1 second here and just, what did you experience? Was it what you expected? Not everybody has to say anything, but I'd love to hear somebody say something. I experienced blah, but I expected blah.
I experienced kind of what I expected, which was, Heck, you did such a good job of taking what is oftentimes talked about as sort of a big amorphous thing that can be hard to discern, and turning it into, there's these 6 buckets, right? And that I could almost imagine very simply trying to find the right way to start small and then get people comfortable with the idea, both on my team and in the company. I picked the thing that is the least objectionable to the company, that actually teaches me how to use AI, like start with the scheduling, and then it can sort of go out from there, so that we're all achieving the same thing together. But by bringing it into those sort of more discrete units of usefulness, it felt really important and helpful. So.
Perfect. Thanks. Chris jumped off. Mariana, thanks for coming. Heck, I was going to say I expected something good, but the way you made it so clear and plain, it was brilliant. I can see why you're asked to speak on this topic a lot.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Better than good.
Thank you. Good talking to you all, and happy and good luck on the next session. All right. Great
Thank
seeing
you.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye-bye.